Okay, so today we're going to review some vocabulary words. It's been a little while. Quadratic equations. First vocabulary word, parabola. Okay, a parabola is the U-shaped graph of a quadratic equation. So I think what's the most confusing thing to students is when we have linear equations, the graph is a line. So like linear equations are lines and they kind of go together. But you have to remember quadratic equations, the graph is a parabola. So they don't use the same word in the word like equation versus what's on the graph. So I think that's a little bit confusing. The vertex is the lowest point of a parabola that opens upward. So I'm going to draw a little picture right here. So the vertex is that lowest point if the parabola opens upward, or it's the highest point on a parabola that opens down. So I'm going to draw a little picture of a parabola opening down. So the vertex is either the lowest point or the highest point, and it depends on which way the parabola is opening. And this is our equation right here. The x-coordinate of the vertex comes from this equation. And we're going to actually talk about that in just a second. Because the vertex and our next vocabulary word, axis of symmetry, are related. The axis of symmetry is the vertical line that divides a parabola into two symmetric parts. The axis of symmetry passes through the vertex. And so the equation for the axis of symmetry is right here. And it's always going to be x equals something because it's a vertical line. So it's vux. So it's going to be x equals blah, blah, blah. Next vocabulary word, the zeros of a function. So we've talked about this a little bit. Sometimes there's one, sometimes there's none. Most of the time there's two. The zeros of the function are the x-intercepts. Now the worst part is this word has like multiple synonyms or whatever. The zeros are the x-intercepts. They're also called the roots or the solutions. So we've been working on solving by factoring and solving by quadratic formula. Those have been the solutions. But it also means those are the x-intercepts, the roots, the zeros, because all those words mean the same thing. The y-intercept is the c value in a quadratic function. So the x value would be 0. So for example, so I'm going to put example, it would be an ordered pair 0, comma, c. So for it to be the y-intercept, the x value has to be 0. The maximum value, the y-coordinate of the vertex of a quadratic function when a is less than 0. Minimum value, the y-coordinate of the vertex when a is greater than 0. Vertical shrink. So we've used other words for this. What other word instead of shrink? Compress. It makes the graph wider or fatter, and that would be when the a is like a fractional amount. So between 0 and 1. A vertical stretch makes the graph thinner or narrower. And then I just gave some extra information down there. To graph a quadratic without a calculator, we would create a table of values and then find the y values and graph those points and draw a curved line. So that's just some vocabulary. We've talked about all of those words before, just bringing it back a little bit. So next page, we're going to actually look at some quadratics and find some of the stuff. So number 1, it says find the vertex, the axis of symmetry, and the y-intercept from this graph. So let's start with the vertex. The vertex in this point is the lowest point, so it would be right there. So let's draw a little line or a little arrow. So we're going to say that's the vertex. The vertex is an ordered pair, so it's going to be like x comma y. So in this case, the vertex would be 4 comma negative 2. Now what's related to the vertex is the axis of symmetry. The axis of symmetry goes through the vertex. So I'm going to draw a dashed line right there. So this line is the axis of symmetry. The axis of symmetry is a line, and it's written as x equals. And so it's where it crosses the x-axis, and it's the x value of the vertex. So in this case, it would be x equals 4. The y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. So in this case, it crosses right here. I'm going to draw a really long line right there. So this is the y-intercept. The y-intercept is an ordered pair that always has 0, comma, and in this case, it is 2. So why does this parabola not look symmetrical? Well, it's because it's just like a little piece of the graph. So in reality, it's got this arrow and this arrow because really this parabola would keep going forever and ever, and it would be symmetrical on that line of symmetry. Okay. We're not going to do all of these examples, so just know that I get that there's not tons of space for your notes, but this one for exercises 2 and 3, find the axis of symmetry and the vertex. So we're not going to do number 3 so that we can use all the room. So we're just going to look at number 2. So to find the axis of symmetry, we are going to use a formula. The formula was actually on the other page, and it is x equals negative b over 2a. So that kind of looks familiar to you because that's a little portion of the quadratic formula, right? So this is the formula we're going to use. The good news is you don't really have to have it memorized because on your formula chart, the very, very bottom of your formula chart, that's the last thing on there, it's axis of symmetry. Okay, so this is one of those things you probably will memorize because you're going to use it over and over, but you don't have to, like, if you're taking your test or whatever and you're freaking out, there's where it is. Okay?
I haven't looked at that thing in so long.
Yes.
So, because we chose maybe be over 2A, what if we have a C variable?
Absolutely. So if we have a C variable, it's great, it's fine. We're not going to use it for this axis of symmetry.
So just ignore it.
So just ignore it. So we have our function. It's written in the correct order. In this specific function, our A is 3 and our B is negative 6. And so just like he brought up, if we had a C value, we wouldn't even need it anyway. So for this, I wouldn't care about it. So now I'm going to use this formula and we're going to plug it in. So we would write x equals negative b, but instead of negative 6, we're going to write positive 6 over 2 times a, and a in this case is 3. So if we simplify this, it would be 6 over 6, which is 1. So our axis of symmetry is the line x equals 1. It has to be written as x equals 1 because that is a line, and it would be up and down that crosses through 1. So that's the A portion of this. Then it says find the vertex. So to find the vertex, here's what I know. So I'm going to make a little V for vertex, and I'm going to do, the vertex is an ordered pair. The ordered pair would have 1 right there. Because whatever our axis of symmetry, that is our x value. So then what we're going to do is we're going to sub a 1 in place of x into our original function. So our original function was 3x squared. So instead of x, I'm going to put 1 squared minus 6x. So I'm going to put 6 times 1. And so f of x really means y. So whatever this equals, that is our y value at that point. So when we simplify this, 1 squared is 1. 1 times 3 is 3. Minus 6 times 1 is 6. So 3 minus 6 is negative 3. So that is the y value when x is 1. So our vertex is 1, negative 3. So if you need to, for your notes, you might want, because like right now that makes sense to you. But when you are looking back, whenever you're taking your test or whatever, it might not make sense. So you might want to make a little note that you sub in for x and find y. And I realized I didn't really give you enough space in that. Okay, so number 4 and 5, we're only going to do number 4. It says graph the function, describe the domain and range. So we're actually going to use our graphing calculator for a second just to see it a little bit faster. But before we do, what can I already tell by looking at my a value?
It's going to be like thin.
It's going to be thin, right? It's going to be thin because 3 is greater than 1, so it's going to be stretched. It's going to be super thin, and it's going to be pointing upwards because it's a positive number, okay? So when we go look at our y equals, we're going to type in 3x squared minus 12x plus 6, and we're going to go look at our graph. And so we were correct. It is skinny. It's pointed up, but this one is actually shifted to the right and down, okay? So we're going to look at our domain. So what do we know domain of parabolas? It's going to go on forever. So our domain, which is what this says, domain is all real numbers. So parabolas, the domain is going to be all real numbers unless we're doing like a real world situation. And when we're doing a real world situation, it won't be all real numbers. The range has to do with the vertex. So we're going to make a little star and we're going to say it's related to the vertex. Why is it related to the vertex? Because the vertex is either the lowest point or the highest point depending on this parabola. So this parabola, our vertex is the lowest point and it's at this spot right here. It's hard for us to see exactly what that is. So where can I get the values where I can know exactly where that is?
Table.
Our table. So we go second table, and we know the vertex is kind of this point where it starts to mirror, right? So in this case, our vertex is 2, negative 6. So what you're going to notice is, remember, range are the y's. So our range in this case is all the y's that are greater or equal to negative 6. Because it's going up forever from negative 6 on. We are going to look at number 6. These are the types of questions that I actually really like. They gave us a problem and they gave us an answer, and we have to find an error. Okay, so they said describe and correct the error in finding the axis of symmetry of this graph. So they did x equals negative b over 2a. So did they use the right formula? Yes. Now I would look at the b's and the a's. Did they plug in correctly? So because our a is negative 2, this right here is not plugged in correctly. So I'm going to say a equals negative 2. So the main thing that we're going to get from that, and we're going to write a little note, is we have to watch your signs, the positive and negative signs. One mistake on a positive negative sign is going to completely change your answer. Okay. If they had gotten a -2 right there, it would be -16 over -4, which would make this be a +4. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather have +4 than -4. Like if my bank messed up a positive negative sign, it would totally change. Okay.
Your life.
My whole life, yes. We're going to look now, 7 and 8. It says, tell whether the function has a minimum value or maximum value, then find the value. So we'll just do number 7 so that we have space. So automatically you should be able to tell if it's minimum value or maximum. What should we look at? The A. This one has a positive A value. So since it's positive, which way is it going to be pointing? Up. So does that mean we're going to have a minimum value or a maximum value? For the vertex, basically. So when they say minimum value or maximum value, they're really talking about the vertex. It's like, again, another word for vertex. So I'm going to just make a little note. Since our A is, so I'm going to write minimum because A is positive. Okay, so we got that. Now we have to find the vertex. So how can we find the vertex? So we could put it in our calculator and find the vertex. What if we don't have our calculator? What can we do? So we have a formula for axis of symmetry, and isn't our axis of symmetry kind of related to our vertex? So I could find the axis of symmetry, that would give me the x value, and then I could plug it in and find the y value. But because of time, we'll use our calculator because I know that's what you want to do anyways. So we'll go y equals and we'll type it in. 5x squared minus 20x plus 3. So the good news is we can use our calculator on our tests and stuff. So I'm not saying don't be dependent on the calculator, but I'm also going to say we got to be careful because things are going to come up, and when you're taking a test, it might freak you out. Because what do you notice about this? We can't see the vertex, right? So we could change our window and we can find our vertex. We could go to the table, but the bad part about this is what if it's not on like a whole number? We might not see it in the table. So I'm going to show you a cool thing in your calculator. So you might want to take notes on this part, and I'll write it down in a second. So what we're going to do is let's change our window. We need our y minimum to be like -20. I could change everything else and make it all like the right proportions, but really the main thing I have to change is my y value. And why did I know that? Because I know I need to see farther down. Once you can see the vertex, here's what we can do. Do you see above the word trace in blue, it says calc. So we're going to do second calc. Do you see how we have an option of a minimum or a maximum? And you guys said we have a minimum. So we're going to go to number 3 and click enter. Now here's the deal. This little, I like to call him a spider. This spider shows up and he's like going along our parabola. What we're going to do is down at the bottom it says left bound. So we're going to move our spider down towards the vertex, but it's got to be on the left side of the vertex. And then yours isn't moving?
Go left. Just gotta use these ones.
Use right and left arrow. Then click enter. Then we need our spider to be on the right hand side. And then we're going to click enter. So the cool thing about this specific calculator is it kind of gives you your lines. This is what you said left, this is what you said right, and it doesn't have to be perfect as long as it's on the left or the right. Right arrow key. Then click enter, and it gives you your minimum value. Now, sometimes your calculator kind of weird does this thing, but really the minimum is 2, negative 17. So back on this sheet, our minimum or our vertex is 2, negative 17. The minimum, maximum, vertex, it's always an ordered pair. So maybe in this space might be a good space for you to make a little note that in your calculator, you put it in y equals, you set your window, then we go second calc, and then you have to choose either minimum or maximum. So you have to be able to identify, does mine have a minimum or does it have a maximum? Then you're going to move your spider. In this calculator, it kind of looks like a flower, but in the older ones that aren't color, it looks more like a spider to me. So we move our spider to the left and hit enter. Then you move your spider on the right side of the vertex and hit enter. And then it says guess, so you're going to hit enter 2 more times. And that's how it gives you the vertex.
What far do you move it to left or right?
I would try to get your spider pretty close to your vertex, so try to move it down. You're going to get more accurate the closer you get, but it doesn't have to be like right there. I don't want you to accidentally go on your vertex, so I would just try to get it as close as possible. But your calculator is pretty awesome, and as long as you're on the left side and the right side, it's probably going to work pretty well. The vertex of a parabola is, so this is number 9. The vertex, we're not going to do 10 and 11 just for time's sake, okay? So we'll look at number 9. So the vertex of a parabola is 2, negative 2. Another point on the parabola is 5, 7. Find another point and justify it. So what do we know about the vertex of a parabola? It's the lowest or highest point. So this one has 2, negative 2. So I'm going to make this little makeshift graph, and I'm going to go right 2, down 2. And then it says I have another point that's 5, 7. So I would go over 5 and up 7. So we know that that vertex is also the axis of symmetry. So we know that it mirrors on the other side from that, right? So I know that I have another ordered pair that's somewhere over here. Now, without drawing like a legit graph, how can I find that point? Well, from the axis of symmetry line, how far to the right is 5, 7? It's like 3 away, right? So if I go 3 the opposite direction, what would the x value be? Negative 1. And then because it's mirrored, I know my y value would be 7. So that one's a little more confusing, and honestly, if I was taking a test, I would like draw a better graph and look at it. Or if I was taking my EOC, in the front of that booklet, there's like the star chart, and then there's like a graph paper, and you can like rip that out when you're taking the EOC, and you could actually draw a graph and make sure. So that's it for our notes today.